All right, good morning, everyone. I am so excited about this topic. I'm so excited that I'm actually doing this panel on my birthday, as that I agreed to do it just because I'm so fascinated by AI, and my wife and kids are pretty upset that I'm not at home. So what I wanted to do, considering we have such experts on the panel with us today, and the topic is actually so important to all of our lives in the future, and how we think this industry, which started off as an industry and now it's a part of everyone's lives, is going to change. I kind of wanted to set the scene for a few minutes. We think about AI as something that started a couple of years ago, but computational conversation started in the 1930s. BERT, which is the original transformer model, I think it's about to celebrate its 10th birthday. And really, this perception of November 22 when ChatGPT launched, it wasn't about a technology revolution. It was really about a design evolution. Suddenly, we had the most complex piece of software on the planet. And you talk to it like WhatsApp or Botim. And I don't know about you, but I speak to my mom on WhatsApp, and now you have a machine at the other end of it. And the most complicated piece of software was being used by basically a messaging application. And this meant that it was accessible to everyone. You didn't have complicated interfaces. So it was a massive change in design. But we have to also realize we're still very early. And I think some of the discussions we're going to have today, AI needs to transcend where it is today, which is language models are still parrots. They predict the next word. They're stochastic parrots. They only predict the next token. And whilst what we're seeing today, even with the evolution of agents, which I'm sure many of you have sort of seen in the event and have heard about, agents are still behaving much like how humans behave. In this conversation, in this panel today, we're going to be making lots of API calls to each other. I'm going to ask a question, you're going to give an answer. And that's how humans work, because our brains aren't connected. But if we think about the future of AI, the future of agents, well, brains should be connected. Agents should be connected. They should be having shared memory. And so when you think about this from a perspective and analogy, it always reminds me of the days when AOL launched the internet and you got the disk. And then everyone said, oh my God, the internet's here. And then you tried to watch a video, and you waited for 1 hour to buffer for 3 minutes of video. Not what we have today, where you watch Netflix or Apple TV. And in some of the cases, and we'll hear more from the experts, some of the cases, we're often using AI to tackle the wrong problem. So for a second, think about your own last 12 months. You probably spoke for about 140,000 minutes. How many unique minutes did you speak about? How many unique concepts did you cover? It's about 2,000. So you repeated 2,000 minutes into 140,000. Actually, that's the same thing in call centers. A call center for an airline, a call center for an insurance company, it might have 100 million minutes of calls, but only 3,000 or 4,000 minutes of actual unique conversation. And I think what we're starting to see now is the power of multidisciplinary AI solving the right problem, not solving just the big data problem. And I leave you with one sort of really interesting example. I'm a huge Lego fan, but Lego ships 3.7 billion pieces a year. But there's only 3,600 unique pieces. And that is actually really powerful as we think about AI and what its potential is. So, Adel, I'd love to start with you. How do you see AI transforming large-scale operations for a company like Emirates? And how are you seeing this enhance customer experiences? And how are you really sort of building that forward-looking vision to take Emirates into the future?
As an airline, two elements becomes very important to us: efficiency and productivities. And these two elements are well achieved by using and implementing AI. Imagine today, if we did not use information technology to process our day-to-day activities. If I look at Emirates today, in the morning, if an IT system doesn't work, the airline will freeze. Check-in will not work. Now, we are reaching to a level where we need to adapt to something different than existing technology. And thanks to the computing power, AI have given us a level higher than what we have today in analyzing data and adapting that data to provide a better service to our customer and a better efficiency and productivity to the airline. The application of AI is endless. We are just at the beginning of it. Data analyzing, and we are a rich industry when it comes to data. We got millions of data from the operation side of it, from a customer point of view, everything. We take this data, analyze it, and come up with solutions that provide a better service to our customers and a better service to the airline. And let me tell you specific what do I mean. If you look at an airport and you come to a check-in area, whether it is in Dubai, UAE, or anywhere else in the world, that infrastructure will not change. That's the infrastructure you have got. But we know for sure the number of passengers are using the airport increasing. So what happened next? I'm going to double the check-in counters, which is not possible because you don't have the infrastructure to allow you to do that. I'm going to keep the people staying in the queues to be processed, and instead of a minute or 2 minutes, it takes 20 minutes or 15 minutes. So my only solution is to bring something that will give me a better and more efficient way of processing that passengers, and relying on technology, relying on self-processing, and expediting the dwell time within that check-in area or the airport to allow me to use the same infrastructures but in a more efficient and smarter way.
That's awesome. And Nigel, maybe sort of turning to you, the thing that we're seeing around with AI is it's about talent, it's about technology, and it's about governance. And, as an expert in this phase, how do you see these foundational elements coming together? How are you adopting modular AI building blocks? And maybe you could touch a little bit also about the risks.
Yeah, I think there's a real danger with the AI that we have today for something that in humans we call the Dunning-Kruger effect. And this is a bias that if you don't know much about a subject, you will find people who are overly confident and will describe, something to you as though it's an actual fact, but they're not an expert. Whereas when you meet an expert on a subject, they're much more cautious about what they share with you. They're much more detailed about finding sources to back up their claim. They give you a sense of certainty or uncertainty around the answer that they give. And I think this is, if we think of AI today, it's probably much more in that person you meet down the bar who's the expert on something and is telling you with great confidence this is the answer, rather than the professor who's the real expert in a subject who's giving you the detail and the references and the confidence around the answer that they're giving. And we need to move much more towards this sort of expert style AI approaches, which will make the AI much more reliable. And this involves bringing in things like uncertainty quantification, which is a sort of probabilistic approach, and these effects are happening. And I think we're going to see a transformation in the way that this goes. And I'm dubious of this term AGI, artificial general intelligence, because if something's general, it's going to be that person down the pub who's kind of the generalist rather than the expert. What we really need is artificial expert intelligence, and maybe lots of different experts specializing in their area. And that also means if it's focused in a particular area, then you know how to try and test it. You know how to try and quantify it. You can quantify the uncertainty of the answers that it's giving you. And so I can see us shifting much more towards many artificial expert intelligences that work together to create solutions that are much more useful than this sort of general intelligence that is being talked about today.
And so I guess maybe just as a quick follow-up to that is, the world seems to be so focused around generative and language models. What do you think is that evolution so that you actually can start to get expert answers versus the guessing parrot answer that you get from a language model today?
So a lot of it is to do with the the agentic flow that you apply to it, which is starting to happen, the sort of the idea of reasoning around an answer. So when you're reasoning against a question, you want to try and decide, how do I understand the question? Do I understand what information I'm going to need to answer this question? Do I understand what intelligence I need to be able to answer this question? It could be this is an inappropriate question for me. You might need a different expert to be loaded. You then want to be able to analyze the answers that it's coming up with and decide which are the best answers. And then around those answers, you want to build in this uncertainty quantification so that when you present your answers, you can say, well, I think it's this or this, and this is my level of certainty around the answers. So in that agentic reasoning process, we're going to see a huge evolution in the way that these systems work. And we're already starting to see it. If you look at some of the coding applications, they actually have different experts within these coding systems that are looking at the code. They're working on different parts, they're verifying the code, they're documenting the code. You've got different experts working together to actually come up with the answer. And what a lot of software engineers do, in our company, for example, is we tend to use 2 or 3 of these systems and get them all to come up with answers. And if they all come up with very different answers, then maybe there's a problem here, maybe this is too difficult. Whereas if they come up with the same answer, you've got a pretty high confidence that this actually is good code.
Yeah. I guess transitioning to His Excellency Younus, I'd love to understand from you, sort of as you see AI, you see this modularization, you're looking at national data, national strategy. What foundational elements like data readiness or talent development, compute infrastructure, how is that shaping your direction, and what do you see as that vision of the future?
Well, I think the 3 are equivalently important, and I think in this panel, it's like we agree that talent, infrastructure, and data are really important. But it's like being Younus, and here I'm biased to data, I would say data is, I would say, the fundamental important element of implementing AI. So without data, there is no AI, and I think the experts in this room can validate and verify that. So, and if you think of that, it's really important you build your foundational blocks around it. In Dubai, we foresaw that any transformation wave of technology would provide us with more data. So governing that data, structuring it in a way with a high quality level of information that is available in a trusted structure is really important. So the whole data initiative within Dubai that started in 2014, have put that foundational block in place, prepared the government organization, and prepared the industry, not only from governing the data, but also driving the value from it. Now what have happened is the technology have really advanced. So now we do have the technology can really crunch. If we would say, previously we were looking at 2 to 3% of analyzing the data that we have in organizations. I think today AI can bring a huge capability. An example of that I would bring today to this conversation is Dubai dashboard. So yes, we used to govern a lot of data in Dubai and prepare it in a structured, centralized platform, but the value of it is today can really be seen in a single dashboard, wherein that dashboard is not providing you with, I would say, statistics and insights. It's even going more in a place where it's augmenting any analyst or decision maker with suggested actions, with suggested, I would say, steps that you need to take in order to take your decision. And to complement to what Nigel have said over here is also, we are not just providing these suggestions and these dashboards, we are also putting some confidence level. How confident we are in terms of the suggested action, and how confident we are in the analysis that's being provided. And what we saw is as we are progressing, and this interaction between the decision maker and the intelligent dashboard improves, we are improving the quality of information that we are building over here. So augmenting every decision maker, and when I say decision maker, can be any one of us in our position, being it a leader of organization, being it a city leader, being it as an individual who's benefiting from government services, we really need to augment them with the decision tools, and this is what we're trying to achieve in Dubai over here. So this is really important. to be put in place. But let's not forget that without a proper infrastructure and a proper talent that can translate those, I would say, dreams into reality, it wouldn't be achieved, and harnessing the power of data would be really so difficult.
That's super interesting. And I guess, it allows us to go to the next part of the conversation, which is around global alignment. Adel, I'd love to sort of come to you, as leading an airline like Emirates that has been so innovative, so at the front of technology. What guiding principles do you think leaders should be adopting when it comes to AI, things like inclusion, trust, but also building high performance? And how does Emirates do that?
I think, and we are very cautious about this within Emirates, while we are too much in support of introducing technology and producing AI element to improve our operations, we keep the human aspect of all of this in there. It's no good bringing machine to do everything and you lose the human touch of it. So in some companies, we've seen it, have fallen that trap, that they have gone too much into technology and they lost the human touch. They lost the importance. Why did we introduce that application to start with? If I'm introducing application for the sake of just I am a technology company or a technology supporting company without really truly evaluating the value that I'm going to get out of that and the impact it's going to have in my customers, then I failed if I don't do that analysis. And the second element of this is the data protection. And today, does the passenger customer trust me using that data and how I'm going to use that data? Will he give me that data and the next day I'm going to be sharing this data with another 1,000 companies? And so the data protections and how I'm using that data to give my customer a better service is a key element. And these two elements, I think we should keep it in mind whenever we're introducing a technology or a new solutions that depends on technology for our customers.
That's a really, really important point. And Nigel, maybe sort of switching to you, and I remember, in the early days of ChatGPT, I think it was an American airline or a Canadian airline that put up a chatbot powered by a language model, and then it booked wrong flights, it overcharged people, it made all sorts of mistakes because it didn't have any grounding. As you sort of think about emerging technologies like agentic AI, I know lots of us are really interested in agents, concept models that are, Meta's talking about it. We were having a discussion backstage. How do you think technology is going to evolve to avoid these common pitfalls, the errors, to make sure it feels more trusted, and also to be a really good co-pilot to humans?
Yeah, it was interesting what we were saying about data. Data on its own doesn't tell you much. It's the data plus context that gives you information. And from information, you can build knowledge that allows you to have intelligence. And so it's the key is this contextualization of the data, understanding about world models, understanding about, also regional aspects as well. I think where we are here, is an amazing place because as we were talking backstage about the whole cultural diversity that exists here, people from many different places, and that allows you to get, much better context sometimes around the information that you have, around the data that you have. And so I think that's the first piece. Just making the models bigger has already proven that we've kind of reached the limit of that. We saw with the DeepSeek moment that actually making these sort of mixture of expert models, 324 different experts in a DeepSeek model that all work together to try and make, a better answer. These are the ways in which we improve these systems. But, it's around that context and having the right information being fed into the models that make it specific maybe to your airline or to your business. That's really how you make these systems, much, much better. And it was very interesting in that case. It was Air Canada, actually went to court. And the court ruled, whereas Air Canada was trying to say, oh, it was the chatbot, it was the AI got it wrong. The court ruled and said, no, it's you, the airline, that got it wrong. You're liable. And so AI is like an employee. You've got to treat it like an employee. You are liable for the output that this AI produces. And so, having that personal element and people in the loop, continues to be very, very important.
Well, I think you've touched on a really interesting point around liability, right? When we think about the future of AI and if it's going to be so much more in the forefront, well, who's liable? Is it the person that gave you the data if you got trained data? Is it the person that built the model? Is it the company that deployed the model? How are you thinking about that, Nigel, in terms of that evolution? Where do you think it's going to land? I know it's a crystal ball right now, but where do you think it's going to land?
Yeah, not straying too far from the point, but in philosophy, there are these things called trolley problems, where you have these sort of dilemmas of, a car racing towards a tunnel, an autonomous car racing towards a tunnel. You're the passenger, you're not in control. There's a child that's now crossing. Do you miss the child and crash you as the passenger, or do you kill the child and save the passenger? It's a tremendous dilemma that, you might face as the driver of a car. In that situation, is it the AI that is at fault if that gets that wrong? Is it the company that produced the car? The reality in that situation is, why is the car going so fast? Why is it going to crash into the child? Why wasn't it taking more care? It's the system that you've built, the person who created the system, the company that deployed the system, they're the one who's responsible. They have to build these systems. The reality of autonomous cars is they'll go a lot slower than you might want. They'll be a lot safer than we might want them to be, versus us, in our sort of overconfident driving approach. And so I think it really is around this whole idea of, yes, you buy these systems, so you probably push some liability on who you buy the system from, but ultimately you deploying the system, you are going to hold the liability in how it gets used.
Well, and I think you've touched it. The Monty Hall problem on autonomous driving was fascinating. Do you go with a grandma, or do you hit the bus for children? And so when as we go from autonomous driving to autonomous government, one of the things I read recently is the UAE sort of leapfrogging ahead to say AI is going to now help write legislation. His Excellency Younus, given we've already discussed the importance of trust and accuracy in AI, as governments like the UAE start to embed this into the national agenda, things like policy, data, governance, infrastructure, they're all coming together. What are your thoughts around how this should be approached, how it can be wider implemented, and I guess more broadly, what would be the things that you would tell other governments, given how well the UAE is really progressing down this?
Well, I think this is really a good question, and I think just to answer it from government perspective is not enough. So I think this requires really a collaboration between public and private to come together, and I would say in a trusted environment. And that trust environment is a sandbox. It's like you need to have sandboxes in places where it's like you do have regulations to be re-looked at. You do have innovations which doesn't need to be constrained. And also you do have the element of privacy, which a lot of time comes within data, to be brought forward and to look at it in a sandbox environment where this innovation doesn't stop, but it finds the answer to a lot of, I would say, challenges. And it provides, I would say, an evidence-based approach towards putting the right governance in terms of how do we really govern the implementation of AI. Second is also like what regulations needs to be changed and to be put in place, as like it really requires a lot of transformations across industries. So sandbox is really important, and it's a way to accelerate government and private sector developments. And just like the moment you have it in place in a city like Dubai, just like we do have multinational companies, just like they are operating just like globally, and they are present locally here in Dubai. So just like Dubai can act as a testbed for many of these implementations and cases that can provide. So it's really important to have that in place. But also, just like while we do that, it's really just like another element that we need to look into, which is really equivalently important, is there's like some, I would say, agreed principles.
Correct.
And those principles need to be in place, and I think this is one of the gaps that we saw in our transformation since last year, that there is a guiding principle of AI needs to be put in place. Dubai issued it, I would say, just like on Monday, And that is looking into multiple areas, looking into governance, looking into practical guidelines of how an AI implementation can take place in an organization. Look at the impact, because at the end of the day, we are not just looking at it from as a technology that's providing a transformation. We need to drive an impact socially and economically. So that kind of framework now, when we want to do across, I would say, border collaboration, would unify the language, and creating a global standard is really important. So using the findings from the sandbox, putting it into a regulation that can be tested locally, but also transferred globally is one of the ways that we can see this like as a government, as a national strategy can act into, but also this like to partner up with, I would say, global standardization organizations such as United Nations, or being at the G20, or the OECD, just like where it can bring just like the different parties together to deliver on top of this transformation. But all of this just like is not enough. Just like it needs to start today. And I encourage just like every member, just like every leader, every entrepreneur, or every CEO to start taking some actions in his organization, because this is a call to action which is really important to progress in these sandboxes, and also to put these principles in places so that when we sit next year over here, we can talk in a common language.
Yeah. Look, and I think that's really important. And one of the things that I've always been thinking a lot about when I've thought about sort of the UAE's sort of, I guess, moving on from just being the innovation state to being the entrepreneurial state is, how do you open source some of this thinking? And do you believe that the way that the UAE is sort of approaching and building governance around AI, executing AI within government, building that automation in, is there like a maximum country size it works for, or would it work for India? Would it work for China? Are there certain limits where it falls off? Like, how are you thinking around that open sourcing of the great philosophy built here?
Well, I think this, like, again, I will go back to the principles of data, then I try to put it on AI. It's like what we've been trying to do over the past 10 years is to put the governance mechanism in place, it's like with an open standard. So this open standard, it's like the first aim of it is to open data. Because the moment you do that, it's like you've kind of overcome the biggest block of AI implementation across the board, because you need to provide data globally. And the moment you standardize data, the way that we can govern it, classify it, and exchange it, I think like by design we are implementing, I would say, a standardization around AI, because technology itself like would be really driven by the data, which is like necessary to do that. So standardization through data is one of the approaches I think that would work best. Open data, I would say, like it is a principle which is really important. And in cases where there are challenges around it, I would say, like the technology itself. So the answer is an AI itself, like to come and put an open standard. For example, if we cannot open data, like we can provide a synthetic version of a data. So someone would ask, say, that is a complex task, how I can really preserve the privacy of the data and provide another instant of it, which is like synthetic. I would say, answer is very simple. Just like put an AI model in place, ask that AI model to remove the confidentiality and provide the synthetic version so that tomorrow is available. So by those moments and those small initiatives and steps that we can take, I'm sure like it will develop a global standards. And the more adoption around Dubai's data, because I would say like we are very unique in Dubai. The data that we have is a global data. Correct. With like having above 200 nationalities living in this country, with having, I would say, there's like more than 500,000 companies registered in mainland and free zones, I think we do have opportunity to standardize the practices locally and operate it globally.
I think you talked about data from a UAE perspective, but Emirates sort of, as an airline, also has some of the largest data sets in the world, Adel. As you think about sort of the future of AI within Emirates, beyond the efficiencies and gains that you're already seeing, how do you see that future of AI in Emirates?
It is, AI is a tool, as I said, and it's not, for us as an airline and aviation industry, is not something totally new. We started using AI and data analysis in the early 80s. Today, the main difference is that the tools and the computing power is much more better. I give you an example, a live example. Is for a human being, is the heart is very important, and you would like to monitor your heart in every second of the day. For us, in an aircraft, is the engine is very important element. That's the heart of the aircraft. And our ability to monitor the health of that engine continuously and every second throughout the flight is very important, not only for its continuous operation, but also for our ability to act timely manner to prevent doing something outside Dubai for that engine. I cannot do that manually. Having a person just monitor with more than 200 plus airplanes flying, and it's become very difficult for a human being just to sit and monitor that. Our ability to rely on a machine learning and analyzing that engines and pop out a message to us, whether it's a specific deterioration in that engine or a proactive maintenance required to be done in that engine, that is an important tool for us on the operation. And this is just an element of how we can adapt AI on that. The other element, we are adding a more simple thing for the customers, and that is using generative AI. As a lot of people coming to the counter and asking for a visa requirement or access luggage or something, what I'm entitled for, where do I need a visa to go to this country? All that will be automated using the generative AI. But one thing I want to tell all the companies who's working on this field is the other day I was working on a case use, and they came to me after almost 1 year of doing the whole thing, and I asked them what is the accuracy level on this one, and they said, okay, 93%. And they were very happy with 93%. I throw out that case outside. So it is, if you're not going to get the right level, you see something in excess of 99%, don't give it to the customer. And that's where our IT companies need to think about. Is anything less than that level of accuracy is not going to be satisfactory to be put in the hand of our customer.
And I think that's a really important point, Adel. And I think, Nigel, we touched on this earlier on where we said, you know, what is the real refinement and improvement from a model perspective? And I'm going to come to you in a second on that. But His Excellency Younus, I'd like to sort of touch on this a little bit. From a government perspective, we sort of talked about what Emirates is doing. But from a government perspective, how do you foresee AI reshaping workforce transformation? You know, how is, from a data and a statistics perspective, how are you actually going to see that impact the broader economy, societal, economic? Like, what's your view on this?
It's like we envision Dubai being a human-centric future global city. So if we put that in front of ourselves, and then it's like, what does that really mean? So imagine we are in the year 2030, and imagine Dubai is not using technology in the way that we used to in the past. Technology is much more humanized. And as a person living in Dubai, as a father to 5 kids, as a leader in the government, I would say as a data specialist, there are agents of AI that are humanized in a way that are augmenting me. So whatever I'm doing in Dubai is happening much faster than anywhere else. And Dubai can listen to you through these agents and can provide to you, I would say, the services in a predictive way instead of reactive. Because I really don't need to renew my passport if the information is already there, and if there are an agent of an AI can take care of it.
Correct.
And then I need to settle my payment at the end. It's like if I am at my office, today, I need to start my day with preparing, how the day would look like, what is the week, what do we have ahead of us. But already today we can see how much augmentation on duty is happening using GPT or using, I would say, Copilot. So Dubai is becoming much more interactive, predictive, and also that's not just happening on one industry, that's happening cross industries. My colleague Adel have spoke about the airline industry, and if you take that, I love travel, and I would love to have an agent from Emirates that can understand my travel behavior in the past and can already, suggest to me my, I would say, plan ahead of time. Just like I used to travel to Cape Town just like over the past 10 years for 5 times. Just like, is it the similar destination I should go to? Or there are, for example, other destinations who are very like into the services that they are offering. So this kind of interaction is what we see and what we envision, and this kind of productivity. And we are already started with our plans of building, I would say, engines in place. So we are taking the concept of agent and trying to build it in an engine. That engine is providing some sort of like augmentation, Dubai monitor, Dubai anomaly, Dubai classification, and so on. So I would say over the upcoming years, we'll see agents that are augmenting humans, but in a much more humanized way, interacting with you and helping you to do things much faster.
Look, I think that's super interesting. And one of the things that you just sort of touched on, and I think this is where the technology and the design becomes so powerful. We're so used to interfaces that force us to make very deterministic steps. You think about booking an airline seat, right? And imagine you're a family with kids. You first say where you're going, then you say how many adults and kids, then you get flight options, then you buy the flight, and then you realize you can't sit next to each other. And imagine, and that's because of how the systems were built to be very, there's a flow and we're going to follow the flow. Now we're moving to a world where someone could give you 30 seconds worth of audio about their trip, how many kids they have, how old they are, and actually the APIs could be called in a completely different order. So you only get the flight where it's good to take the 3-year-old and you're all together. And I think that's really the big evolution that we're seeing and sort of you touched on. I guess the one small piece, and then Nigel, I'd have to sort of go to you for the last question, is obviously Dubai and the UAE is doing so much, but you have counterparts. How hard is it to build some of these things, for example, passports that are going to be digital or cards where you can just through retinal scan and go through, where your counterparts haven't quite got there yet? And so how is the government and how are you thinking around building that sort of elasticity?
Well, I think this is a good question. I will go back to the comment you made on how AI is humanized, and just like, imagine how much we've changed also in the way that we are interacting. Have you ever imagined just like asking, I would say, an AI engine, kindly or please do this or that for me? See, this is a change that we are witnessing today. So let's keep that always in our mind and how we are humanizing technology. So going back into this, like how we are handling this, like I would say, cross-border, or how do you bringing this, like a lot of challenges that are around. I think it's really important, just like to start with a vision. I think that is something needs to be in place, and I think the reason why we are here gathered, our visionary leader have seen this, like the opportunity that we have in our hand, while many other governments just like have taken I would say actions like to be conscious of the technology. I think our government have looked at it as an opportunity and exploring what kind of transformation and benefit outcomes that we can generate out of it. So I think the vision is really clear, and also the speed of implementing that vision is also another thing that we always look into here in UAE and Dubai specifically. A second, I think there's like, it's not going to be there without challenges. Well, the question is just like how we are addressing it. Are we looking at it from the lens of opportunity? And again, just like when you start, you need to start internally, just like, and then just like looking around the ecosystem and try to expand it from there and try to solve one step at a time, just like some of the challenges that's coming from this kind of an interaction. A third is definitely just like you need to understand what is the end value. Being a just like social or economic, I'm sure just like as much as Emirates would like to provide us this joyful experience, it's also just like needs to look at it in a sustainable economic way. So sustainability of it from an impact is really important, and putting those front, I think it brings a great alignment. So bringing people just like with clear direction, vision, action in place, just like, and then just like what kind of impact that we can drive every day, just like we're gonna progress. And as we progress from last year to this year so much, I'm sure next year just like we would gonna see and witness much more. And as we go, just like this becomes a daily life. Just like this is not anymore a hype. This is a reality and everyday job.
You know, I think you've hit it on the nail, right? And some of the discussions I've had with customers, not only in the region but globally, you know, it's always been around what's the use case? And broadly speaking, you know, it's the reduction of human variability because we get bored. AI doesn't get bored. It's reduction of tasks. But I actually think the most interesting one, and sort of we've touched on it in this discussion, is reducing the time between idea and execution. And so Nigel, sort of to wrap up today's session, and we'll ignore the timer for a second, you know, as someone that's been at the core of infrastructure for AI, you know, what future breakthrough excites you the most?
Well, you sort of touched on it. There are a number of tasks that you can follow and execute in a sort of deterministic way, following a process. But there's a lot of stuff we do where there isn't really a clear process, where you have to conceptualize, you have to come up with new breakthroughs. And we sort of think of that as being a very human place. But if you look at the way AI is generating images, for example, using this approach that calls diffusion, you start with a concept that you describe in your prompt, and then it fills in details to make a more and more accurate picture. The same approach can potentially apply in the next generation of AI agents. So you'll have deterministic AI agents, but you'll also have diffusion agents that will actually be able to conceptualize and come up with new approaches and new ideas. And what's really fascinating about that as well is transformer models won't work well on a quantum computer, but diffusion agents potentially will work very well on a quantum computer. And this idea that you can then evolve, you know, sort of through an evolutionary process by searching a very large space on a quantum computer, you'll be able to come up with these sort of conceptualizing breakthroughs driven by AI. And that just opens up another world, I think, for us. And so it feels like we're sort of in this world where computers have managed to decode our encoding scheme, our voice scheme that we use to communicate information. The next stage is actually going to help us conceptualize and come up with new breakthroughs.
That's awesome. Look, I think there's a whole different discussion around quantum and AI, but it's been a great panel. We've had infrastructure, government, large corporation, and software all sitting on the table for once. So I really want to thank my esteemed panelists and great experience. Thank you so much.